As I stand here on the sidewalk, looking up at this tall brick building that houses the Tacoma Buddhist Temple with its big green doors and stone artwork and big beautiful trees, it makes me wonder, how have the Japanese that immigrated to Tacoma and founded this temple kept their culture or assimilated to American life? And how much has immigration to Tacoma impacted their religious lives? Hey, my name is Emily Toyson, and I'll be hosting this podcast with some of my friends, Ali Burke, Kevin Track, and Marlene Casieja, and we'll be talking about Japanese immigration to Tacoma and the religious assimilation to American culture. As we began to research the Japanese immigrants' experience in Tacoma, we came across the Tacoma Buddhist Temple, located on Basa Avenue in Tacoma, which I described right at the beginning of this podcast. We wanted to know more about the impact of this temple on the Japanese immigrants' religious lives. Here we have Ali to give us some more information about the history of the temple.
So to start things off, I'll be talking first about when Japanese immigrants first came to the Tacoma area. Japanese immigrants first arrived around 1887 through 1888, and from 1889 to 1910, there was a dramatic influx of 1,550 immigrants. These immigrants began to establish a strong Japanese community in the Tacoma area.
So how did this community construct the temple we know today?
Well, actually, the Buddhist temple in Tacoma we know today started off extremely small and casual. At the very beginning, Buddhist families would actually alternate going to each other's homes in order to practice their religion, because they were unable to travel to the nearest Buddhist church in Seattle. Then, as the word spread, and more families joined, a respected leader and grocery store owner, Suruku Kurumoto, started a plan to invite Reverend Hoshin Fuji of the Seattle Buddhist Church to conduct monthly services in the back room of his general store. And it worked. From 1910 to 1915, Reverend Fuji provided spiritual guidance and shared the Buddha Dharma with many of the pioneers of the valley, all within a general store.
Did the church grow alongside the developing Japanese community?
Yeah, the church actually continued to grow as the Japanese community continued to grow as well. Because of this, leaders of the church began organizing a more formal Buddhist church in 1915, which was financially supported by members of the church. The first Tacoma Buddhist church actually came into existence in a small rented room on the second floor of the Hiroshima Hotel in Tacoma. The first president elected there was Hoago Nakashima, who invited Reverend Fuji to continue to lead the services. The church continued to grow even more. By 1918, the membership grew to 50, and they decided to expand their space beyond the cramped hotel room to a 1,000 square foot hall that they leased. And on April 8, 1919, the church was officially registered with the Buddhist Mission of North America. Although this new space was larger, the membership continued to grow, and the organization of a larger church began. The community raised $40,000 to build this multi-story church, and in 1929, it was constructed. It's crazy to think that the beautiful and popular temple we know today had such an interesting history that all began in the back room of a general store.
Yeah, the temple has a big history, but I still don't know much about Buddhism. Kevin, don't you practice this religion? Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, totally. Buddhism is a fairly broad term when it comes to faiths because there are so many, like Theravada, Zen, and more. In this case, the Tacoma Buddhist Temple practices a sect of Pure Land Buddhism called Shin Buddhism, otherwise known as Jodo Shinshu. It is a school of Pure Land Buddhism founded by Shinran, a pupil of Honen, who also formed a sect of Pure Land Buddhism. This sect is a little bit more unorthodox than other Pure Land Buddhists.
I didn't know there were multiple types. Do they all believe in the same things?
Their beliefs vary, but let's start with the essentials. The word Buddha comes from the Sanskrit verb bud, meaning to awaken. All Buddhists share a set of common beliefs in the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, as well as a commitment to an ethical code of living, the precepts, the truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of origin of suffering, samudaya, the truth of cessation of suffering, nirada, and the truth of the path of cessation of suffering, magga, which is the Eightfold Path. Tacoma's Shin Buddhism has a focus on Amida Buddha's last sermon, or what they call the essence of Shin Buddhism. Make yourself a light. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend upon anyone else. Make my teachings your light. Rely upon them. Do not depend on any other teaching. The concept of nirvana comes to mind, which is the transcendent state that everyone seeks to achieve. It's like you've gone past the mortal plane and achieved a peaceful, perfect place within the world, which is also called becoming one with Buddha. This funnels into the cycle of rebirth, which is also essential to the Buddhist belief. One builds bad and good karma until death. When they are judged, Buddha sees if they have achieved nirvana or if they have fulfilled their purpose. With this, they are either returned to a new body or join Buddha forever. And that's pretty much it.
Wow, that's a lot. I've never heard of any of this before. Where did this all start in America?
Well, Buddhism first came to North America through Chinese immigrants who settled in the western parts of the United States beginning in the 1840s, as well as by North Americans and Europeans who visited Asia and brought back with them Buddhist texts. Japanese immigration and their religion, as we are focusing on the Japanese migrant group, in 1898, the Buddhist Mission of America was established by members of the Pure Land School of Japanese Buddhism. The internment of more than 100,000 Japanese American citizens during World War II was a serious impediment to the development of this institution, but it eventually became the Buddhist Churches of America, or the BCA. The BCA continues today as one of the largest and most stable Buddhist communities in the country. The change from Buddhist Mission of America to Buddhist Churches of America was due to World War II internment, an attempt to not be a political target for something like, say, spying.
Oh yeah, the temple has changed immensely through World War II and more. Don't you know more about this, Marlene?
Yeah, it's so crazy to me to think about how much the temple has gone through over the years. In 1945, right after World War II ended, the temple was used as a headquarters while the Japanese waited for housing to become available. At this time, Reverend Nishiaga was temporarily assigned to the Seattle church to officiate until their minister returned. Once he returned, he was able to go back to his own temple and perform his original job there. Over time, the Japanese really wanted to reach out more to their community. One of the first steps they did was by Americanizing the temple. Let's listen to this interview of Kosho Yuwaka as they talk about how the temple became Americanized and what they thought.
But to be more accepted in the American society, it was a very important thing for earlier Japanese immigrants and younger generation in those days to be accepted, to be not accepted, to be part of the society. Right. They used the term like church and many other things we have adopted.
So, since the temple started becoming Americanized, how does the idea of having a minister change, and how is the minister selected?
There have been many influences on Buddhism in America, but within the Buddhist religion, doctrine and most traditions remain the same. Talking about Amida Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, the temple ownership has been passed down from generation to generation. At this time, their minister was Kosho Yuwaka, the first son. But now it doesn't have to be that way anymore. The minister can literally be anybody.
Is there anything in particular that the church still does that's the same?
Yes. Now, the temple has been around for some time, and even though the temple was becoming Americanized, they still do some of the original things they used to do, as the temple still uses rosary beads to pray and burn incense. They still play the same music and instruments. Also, the men sit on the right side of the hondo, which is a sacred hall, and women sit on the left side. Did you actually know the original name of the temple was the Tacoma Hongwaji Buddhist Church? Another really cool fact is that Sunday school is also a big part of how it's become Americanized. Sunday school began in 1926. It started with less than 10 students, but by the late 1930s, it grew up to 150 students. Services and classes were exclusively in Japanese until Reverend Sonia Fratt's arrival in the early 1930s, and she began to translate services into English.
That's really interesting. Are there any more resources that I can use to learn more about the Tacoma Buddhist Temple?
There actually is. When looking for resources to learn more about the Tacoma Buddhist Temple, Kevin, Ali, and I were recommended to talk to Eric Hammerstrom, a religious professor here at Pacific Lutheran University, who is currently a member and associate minister of the Tacoma Buddhist Temple. When we were able to ask him some questions about his feelings about the temple, and as well ask him about some interesting information, he told us that the temple community is 2/3 Asian, 1/3 Caucasian, a few Black, and Latino, which make up the entire population of the community. He also said that part of the Americanization of the temple is due to younger generations taking over the temple who are Americans and want to introduce more American culture into their roots because it feels more natural to them. The current culture is very community-based instead of solely relying on Buddhist teachings. They enjoy time together, but still in a very Buddhist tradition.
After researching on this topic and hearing everything that Allie, Kevin, and Marlene had to say, I feel so much more informed about the Japanese immigrants' religious experience since migrating to Tacoma. In many ways, they have assimilated to American culture, which has altered some of their religious practices and has also led to the diversity of the Tacoma Buddhist temple. However, in many ways, the traditions of Buddhism have been kept alive. Special thanks to Professor Eric Hammerstrom for working with us in the production process of this podcast. Without him, we would have never seen an in-depth look at the current culture and tensions of assimilation or general feelings of the Tacoma Buddhist temple. Thank you for listening to our podcast.